and I'll hit the live stream. So after this point, the meeting will be broadcast.
Perfect.
I'm going to tell you,
Okay, we are now live.
Okay. Waiting for, there we go. Okay. Hello, I am Leslie Seawester, and I serve as chairperson for the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. I ask the members of the board to respond to a roll call to signify their presence at this open meeting that has been conducted remotely by conference call and electronic medium. David Anderson.
come on.
Donna Horner-Quayle.
Present.
Mary Jones.
Present.
Jacqueline Lightcap.
Here.
Jonna Norton.
Here.
Bruce Nystrom.
Here.
I don't see Andrea. Rick Steele.
Here.
Deb Stidham.
Here.
And Carolyn Zasfrain.
Here.
Note the following staff members are also present. David Fye, Leslie Allen.
Here.
And Cindy Diorpoli.
And Cindy was on the call earlier. She might have dropped out.
There.
Okay.
Yeah. She just took a minute for her mute to come off, so she's good. Assistant Attorneys General Lainey Barnard is also present.
I'm here.
Next, David Fye will read a message concerning this meeting being held remotely.
This is David Fye, Executive Director for the Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Public comment allows the public to address the board about its concerns, but the Kansas Open Meeting Act, or KOMA, does not require the board to provide public comment or answer questions from individuals. Individuals requesting to provide public comment could contact the executive director prior to the meeting by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov. There will be no public comment at the meeting today, as no individuals requested to provide public comment. Because we are conducting the meeting remotely by conference call and other teleconference ability, I state for the record the following information. Access to the meeting is being conducted by a medium of interactive communication that allows members of the public without cost to attend the meeting through the use of the conference call and on the board's YouTube channel. While the meeting is conducted remotely, the requirements of KOMA are not suspended. As such, we will be conducting the meeting pursuant to the KOMA. The board's agenda includes an executive session. If the board elects to go into executive session, the board will follow the following process. First, the board will be in an open meeting before going into an executive session. Then a board member must make a motion to recess for an executive session that is seconded by another board member. Each board member will then vote. A majority of the board will vote in favor of the motion to exercise the executive session. The chair will announce the result of the vote. The motion must contain a statement of justification for closure and the subject to be discussed pursuant to KSA 75-4319B, and the time and place the open meeting will resume. If a motion for executive session passes, the conference call will be placed on hold. Attendees may stay on the call or return to the conference call number at the expiration of the executive session to attend the remainder of the meeting. The public will be excluded from the executive session portion of the meeting, as the executive session will be conducted by electronic means that is not available to the public. When the board members return to the conference call, the open meeting will resume through the conference call. The complete motion for an executive session will be recorded in the minutes. And if an executive session motion is called for, I have language here, and how that process will work is that if a motion is called for, I will ask, does a board member like to make the following motion, and then I'll read the language. And if a board member wants to make that motion, they can. On November 18th, 2021, we sent notice of the board meeting to all individuals who requested notice of the board meeting. The notice was also posted on the board's website, ksbsrb.ks.gov. You may obtain a copy of the notice at that website. An agenda and other meeting materials was posted to the board's website on the day of the meeting. You may also request a copy of the agenda by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov with the subject line "Request for the agenda," and it will be sent to you. The notice contains information for the conference call and YouTube channel that allows the public to attend the meeting free of charge. The notice also states that if any technical issues during the meeting, you may send an email to bsrb@ks.gov. bsrb@ks.gov. A recording of the meeting will be available on the Bsrb YouTube channel following the conclusion of the meeting by using the link onto the meeting on the agenda. And our conference call line is active. If there's anyone on the conference call, just go ahead and identify yourself. Okay, if I hear any beeps throughout the meeting, I will let you know that an individual has joined. And I see that Andrea Perdomo Morales has just entered the waiting room, so I'll go ahead and admit her to the meeting.
Welcome, Andrea. Okay, the meeting is now called to order and the board will begin its discussion of the first item on its agenda. So the first item is agenda approval. Has everyone had an opportunity to review the agenda? Any comments? Changes?
I'd move to approve the agenda as published.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, motion passed. We'll follow that agenda. There was no public comment, so we'll move down to, I guess we've got minutes to approve from previous board meetings, September 13th, 27th, and October 25th. We've had a chance to look those over.
Yes, I have one minor addition for the minutes of September the 13th. Leslie, under the professional reports, social work, the last sentence is the meeting is scheduled for September and it has no date, but it should be October the 19th.
Okay, thank you, Carolyn. David, you and Leslie be able to get those that change?
Yes, and I was just checking something. I think there might have been 2 social work advisory committee meetings. So I think at the time of this meeting, I think that might have been the next scheduled social work meeting, but there were 2. There was one in September, and I think there was one in October as well.
There's not a date on the September, so I didn't have is there a September date then?
That might have been intentional, where they just said it was in September.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and add some context there and then note
Okay.
that the other meetings that followed this. So.
Okay, thank you, David.
Carolyn, would you like to make that motion with those changes for the September 13th agenda?
Well, I move that David take a look at the September date that I'm unaware of and to add October the 19th, if that is correct.
With those changes, that motion, is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Same sign. Okay. So the 13th. Looking at the 27th, any questions, comments, changes? Anyone like to make a motion to approve the minutes from the 27th of September?
I'll make that motion. Sorry, Mary.
I'll second.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed, same sign. Okay. Those are approved.
And Leslie, I did double check. So Carolyn was correct. The next meeting was October from that September meeting. There was a second meeting and that was in early November. And so I'll just go ahead and modify that to reflect that October date from the first set of minutes. And then also there was a meeting on November 3rd. So
Thank you. Always thorough. October the 25th meeting minutes.
I'd move to approve.
Okay.
And I second it.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Okay. Thank you.
All right, looks like it's the executive director's report.
Today's kind of a big day here in the office. The governor had asked staff to return to primarily working in state buildings. And so our staff is all back here in the office, aside from we've allowed some telework to our investigators, but it's on a limited basis. We're doing a pilot similar to what we had done in the fall before the governor's direction changed and individuals returned to primarily remote work. So we have gone back to having most individuals here in the office. The entire time the office has been open, but we were kind of on a skeleton staff to try to make sure that we could fulfill the governor's direction to keep most employees working remotely, but also keep the office open. So based on the governor's direction, we have most of our staff back in the office. And so they are working on lots of different tasks around the office here. We also have hired a new employee. We have a new administrative assistant named Tyla Wadsworth, and we're really excited to have her on board. She's going to be helping us out primarily with administrative work and a little bit of licensing, but it'll be nice that we've already had a chance to work with her for a couple weeks now, and she's going to be a really good fit here in the office. An update on our meetings. So just as an end of the year sort of note, throughout 2021, we launched the Bsrb YouTube channel at the very beginning of last year. Through the end of calendar year 2021, we have broadcast or uploaded 42 meetings, either board meetings or advisory committee meetings, and those were viewed a total of 917 times. So I want to applaud you all for all of your work. We did have quite a few meetings and covered a lot of material, and I've received a lot of positive comments from individuals that I've talked to from the public and from different meetings, just thanking us for putting that information out there so that they could be informed about our activities. So I wanted to pass that along to you. A note about our revenues and expenditures. So each year the agency is asked to provide a budget in the fall. The deadline for that is September 15th, and we did submit a budget. We went ahead and submitted the same amount that was already approved by the 2021 legislature, although we did some adjustments based on changing cost and savings primarily related to the pandemic. So we went ahead and submitted that budget. And just as a half-year update, we are 6 months through fiscal year 2022. The beginning cash balance for the Bsrb fee fund at the beginning of the year was a little under 2.1 million. And so far this year, we have collected about $423,000. We've spent about $360,000. So we are still right around about 2.3 million. We do expect there to be some additional expenses throughout the second half of the year. But I wanted to give you an update in terms of our revenue coming in, our expenditures, and also our current cash balance in the fund. And just as a note, for fee-funded agencies, 10% of all revenue that we collect goes to the state general fund. So that revenue total is before the amount is taken out that goes to the state general fund. Under some legislative updates, we are at the beginning of the 2022 legislative session. The first day of the session is today, although today is primarily mostly ceremonial, opening of the House and the Senate chambers. The actual committee meetings will start to take place over the next few weeks. The governor's State of the State address is usually on the Tuesday evening when the session begins, so that will be tomorrow evening. It'll be at that meeting that we learn more about the specifics of the governor's recommendation for budgets and different things. Based on the initial review, there weren't any modifications to the Bsrb's budget, but if there are any changes, those probably would be things that would affect all state agencies, and so I'll keep you up to date if there are any things that come out in the State of the State. One thing the legislature will be working on this year will be redistricting, so that will be a big item on the legislative agenda. But we will be tracking bills here in the office that relate either to mental health or regulatory boards in general. And so I will keep you informed of anything that has to do with those. In terms of legislation, so legislation will be requested on behalf of the board. We had met with Jenna Moyer. She is a member of the revisor's staff. And Jenna helps out with the Senate Public Health and Welfare Committee meeting. And we talked to her about initial bill draft and recommendations from the board. The three distinct items that are included in the Bsrb's bill for this 2022 legislative session. The first would be to allow master's level practitioners or above under the Bsrb to be able to test for that licensed addiction counselor license. The second was some cleanup language from last year's bill, House Bill 2208. There was an amendment that was put onto the bill that struck a 350-hour direct client contact requirement for social workers seeking a clinical level license, but the language went further and struck some language which is having an effect that is limiting, because the actual language of the amendment struck the 350 hours of direct client contact, but it also struck the phrase or additional postgraduate supervised experience as determined by the board. And in talking with the staff of the revisor's office, we don't believe it was the intent of the maker of that amendment to be restrictive. We think that was just an unintended consequence by striking that additional language. And the board had earlier given us the authority to seek adding back that language to allow additional postgraduate supervision as determined by the board. Sort of as a technical item in terms of why that's important is there's a KSA 65-6306D that follows that makes reference to what can be accepted. And so without that additional language, it would be more restrictive than what we would allow before 2208 in certain ways. And so we don't think that will be an issue to add that language back in, but that's more of a cleanup item for this year's bill. And then the last item was that the Licensed Psychology Advisory Committee had made a recommendation to require 3 continuing education hours in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And at the board's last meeting, there was a request to the board from the chair of that advisory committee to allow that to be included in the board's legislation, and the board allowed that to go forward. So that would be included in the bill essentially on behalf of the Bsrb. The language at that meeting was, would it be able to go forward or would it be blocked? But I just wanted to clarify for the board that since the actual interpretation would be that that would be something that would move forward from the board unless you would want to change that at this meeting. But that was my interpretation based on the conversation at that meeting. And then also, in terms of putting this into bill language, there's going to be some questions as far as the interpretation of that item. So my understanding is that to allow time for individuals to go ahead and do that, if the bill does pass and that provision is enacted by the legislature, it would start no earlier than 2024 to allow individuals sufficient time to go ahead and meet that requirement for the new continuing education requirement. And then I'm sure in committees, they will ask me for a definition of diversity, equity, and inclusion. That was not something that was actually flushed out, and it doesn't really need to be flushed out in terms of the statutes. But it would be helpful if the board had a definition of that in situations where they might deny renewal of license or penalize someone for not meeting that requirement. So it'd be helpful to have a little more context on that. So if it's the board's if the board wants to define that in regulations, that would be helpful. But I wanted to bring that to the board to say that I'm in thinking more about all the details of that item. It is likely that I will get those questions in front of committee. So I wanted to bring that to your attention prior to it going before a committee, just so that I understand what your mindset is on that item. In terms of some other updates, I mentioned the budget for the Bsrb that does need to be approved by both the House and the Senate. I've already had a meeting with Martin DeBoer. He's the analyst from the Kansas Legislative Research Department who I'll be working with this year. He's been following this budget for the last couple of years, so he's familiar with it. So I think that will be fine. Some other updates, SIPAC is the interstate compact for licensed psychologists, which allows them to practice under the authority of SIPAC, doing teleservices in states that are part of the compact if they obtain the correct item from SIPAC, or allows a limited days of number of in-state practice under SIPAC. Information about SIPAC has been updated and posted to the Bsrb's front page. The authority to practice interjurisdictional telepsychology, that's an APIT, that would be the item which would allow licensed psychologists to practice telepsychology in other compact states under the SIPAC Commission. And then the license which would allow them to practice a temporary number of days in state is the Temporary Authorization to Practice, or the TAP. And there is a link on the front page which allows individuals to get more information on both of those items. We are going to be working with SIPAC in terms of any licensure verifications or any verifications of discipline. Additionally, I think when we were first going through some of the information on SIPAC, there were some questions about, would we know who all is practicing in Kansas? And unfortunately, there's really not a list of who is practicing in Kansas on which specific dates. However, there is a link that I put on the Bsrb website where you can verify if a psychologist is practicing under SIPAC. So if they have sent an application to SIPAC for approval and they have been approved, whether it's in Kansas or another state, you can check that list to see if someone does hold a APIT or a TAP currently. And then there's some other links there for additional questions on SIPAC. So we've already received a few questions from individuals who are interested in applying, and we've been trying to clarify as best as possible. I think one of the things that could be a little confusing is just because we are now officially part of SIPAC as of January 1st, 2022, that doesn't automatically grant any psychologist or licensed psychologist the ability to practice. They still have to apply directly to SIPAC to get approval for those items. And then the second part of it is it does specifically only apply to licensed psychologists. So it does not include master's level psychologist or licensed psychotherapist. So, but that is the update on SIPAC. A couple other updates. There was a bill that passed the 2021 legislature, the Kansas Fights Addiction Grant Review Board. This item is under the Attorney General's office, and I don't have any updates to provide to you aside from I've continued to track this. I've reached out to the Attorney General's office to see if any meetings have been scheduled, and currently that group has not come together yet. But when they do start meeting, we will attend. I will attend on behalf of the board and provide updates for you. The Overdose Fatality Review Board had a proposed bill for the 2021 legislature. That bill did not pass. However, the KDHE, the Kansas Department of Health and Environment, did receive a grant from the CDC. And so they were able to begin to meet with any interested individuals. And so I attended 2 of those meetings, and Bruce attended those meetings too. They have mainly worked out some planning mechanics, and then they're planning to meet again in 2022, but they want to get more legislative direction too. So I think there's going to be a renewed effort to get that bill to pass. There was also a legislative committee. It's a special committee on mental health modernization and reform that met this fall. I have not seen the final recommendations from that committee. However, when I have those, I will share those with you. Leslie Allen and I were asked to attend a couple meetings of a telehealth work group and talk to that group. And so we did, and we spoke to them a little bit about the Bsrb and just answer some general questions, but we'll be tracking the work of that group. It's possible that they may continue to work in future years, but I'll update you on that. And then I just included some information about some previous meetings that we had facilitated here at the office, and also some meetings to be attended. One I wanted to call your attention to specifically is at the end of January, on January 28th and 29th, I was invited to speak to a Federation of Associations of Regulatory Boards, it's FARB. We are not a member of FARB. However, I think that group could be really beneficial, and I think connecting to that group would be really beneficial for us. Even though we are not a part of it, they reached out and indicated that they would be willing to pay for me to attend that conference. So I plan to do that, and then learn additional information from other entities on how they're dealing with a lot of things that we could improve upon here at the office as well. So the specific topic they asked me to speak about was public protection through sharing information. So I'll talk a little bit about what we've done this past year and some of our efforts to provide better public protection through some creative ways of sharing information. So with that, I will go ahead and end my report, and I can answer any questions from the board members.
Thank you, Dave. I think it's great that we can be represented by Dave at the FARB, the FARB conference. So I appreciate Dave stepping up and doing that. So that's really great that you're going to even be presenting. So what an honor. So congratulations on that too. So
Thank you.
All right, staff reports. Do you have any staff reports today?
So generally, Leslie Allen would handle this part of the licensing report, but she's been a little under the weather, so I'm going to save her voice for a couple other items later. But I did put together a little table, 2 tables actually. It's in your packet of material. It is labeled Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board History of Permanent Licenses, January 2018 to current. So starting with fiscal year 2022, we started providing a breakout of all the different total permanent licenses each of the months of the board meeting. And there was a request by board members to go back and provide some historical information so that board members could see sort of the trends over time. So what you have in front of you is you have a table that begins with July of 2018. And I started doing about 6 months between different updates, but all the permanent licenses are broken out there. There is a break in the table from March 2020 till July 21. And the reason for that, as you're aware, is during the pandemic, the governor issued a series of executive orders that delayed expiration of licenses. So while some individuals did go ahead and renew their license, other individuals waited and renewed their license later. And also individuals who would have let their license just expire because they wanted to stop practicing or moving out of state, those licenses were held open. So the totals during that time period really wouldn't accurately reflect all the individuals who are currently permanently practicing. But we wanted to give you that information. And we noted the issue with the executive orders under the table. On the second page, we went ahead and took the same information and we grouped it because some of the changes in categories of license could be affected by individuals going from, let's say, a bachelor's level to a master's or a master's to a clinical level. So in terms of looking at the overall profession to see those numbers, that's really on page 2. And you can see over the time span here, which of the professions have grown or have decreased. But we hope this information is helpful as you are looking at the specific professions and seeing the changes over time.
Thank you for putting this together, David and Leslie. This is really helpful information.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for Dave on that? Okay. Next item is request for adjustments to terms of finalized orders.
And so when the board makes a decision on certain licensure matters or disciplinary matters, there are orders that are prepared by our legal counsel. And then as those work through, once those are deemed official orders, there are certain terms under which individuals can practice or different things like that. So in this case, we have an order that has been final, and there was a request from an individual to the terms of the order. And so on your agenda, you do have a request from an individual named Grace Meichenhaus, and she is here with her supervisor, David Irwin. And they're both prepared to talk to the board directly in terms of the request for an adjustment on the terms of an approved order. As you'll notice, the next item in the agenda is an executive session. We do have legal counsel for the board, Lainey Barnard, here in attendance too. Discussions between legal counsel and the board are advice from legal counsel is an executive session type item. So we can go ahead and take the request and here in the open meeting. And then if a board member wants to make the motion to go into an executive session for legal counsel to provide the board any guidance, that could happen. So at that point, so I'll go ahead and stop now, but I just wanted to preface this. This is the first of these type orders that we've held at a board meeting, at least as long as I have been here. So I wanted to go ahead and preface that before we begin. And Leslie, if you want, I can go ahead and turn it over to Grace, and then she could explain to the board what requests for adjustments she would like to make, and then maybe the reason why she would want those requests for adjustments.
We also have a letter from Ms. Meichenhaus. I think the board received that as well. But yes, please, Ms. Meichenhaus, if you'd like to go ahead, we'll give you a little bit of time to review that.
Good morning. First of all, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you all this morning. I very much appreciate it. So my order was put in place in March of last year, and I began working as a functional family therapist in June 14th. As a part of my job at Cornerstones of Care doing therapy, FFT is what is the model we're using. I'm required to be credentialed by the 3 Medicaid MCOs in Kansas in September. Unfortunately, the first of the 3 MCOs, United Healthcare Optum is the name of the MCO, denied me credentialing because my license is viewed as encumbered or under probationary status. And so this is not something I foresaw happening. I couldn't see this in the future. Now we are waiting on approval for the second MCO, Sunflower. We have not heard anything back yet. It's been about 2 months. Unfortunately, this puts me in quite a challenging situation. So if these MCOs deny me credentialing, then I will unfortunately lose my position as a therapist, and I will be moved to a non-clinical role. HR has already told me that will happen. And therefore, if I move to a non-clinical role, I'm no longer in a position of doing therapy. I cannot fulfill the board's order. So it's sort of a catch-22 that I'm in right now. And in lieu of the order, the terms of the order that were put out in March, I have drafted a letter and some requests of things that would help me to both show the board that I am doing well, and also to be able to complete the order. And so David Irwin is here. I'm not sure if you guys want to ask either of us questions, but I would open it up to, I guess, if any of you have anything you'd like to ask.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Meikenhouse.
Thank you so much.
David Irwin, did you have any comments or anything you'd like to share?
Take my appreciation for making this time during this meeting, and confirm that what Grace has said, that we've got denial for a 2-year period from Optum, awaiting Sunflower and the other, and that for most therapy positions, including for grant work, you have to be able to bill Medicaid, and this is viewed as an encumbrance. And so to clarify, I think what Grace is asking, is there a way that we could take the 6 months that have already been successfully completed as sufficient so that we can avoid having to make a switch due to ongoing denial by the Medicaid management organizations in Kansas. So thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Does the board have any questions for Ms. Meikenhouse or Mr. Irwin? Okay, I see no questions by the board.
Can I make one more comment or say one more thing?
Certainly.
Thank you so much. So the last, or the second to last item in the list, I think, hold on, let me pull that up. So it's second to last, it's number 6. So allowing me to be a contract employee. So if I were, the order specifically states that I'm not allowed to do private practice, which unfortunately, if I do get moved into a non-clinical position, that's an opportunity for employment that I won't have. So this is a situation where I'm going to be shut off to the majority of employment opportunities out there, because most, like David said, require me to bill Medicaid. If I was working as a contract employee, so this would be if I were moved into a non-clinical position, So this would just be an option as a backup. Doing that would be private pay. So I would not need to worry about, billing Medicaid.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Meikenhouse.
Leslie, I
Great.
have a question.
Oh, go ahead, Deb, sorry.
So I guess considering that particular request, I guess I'm a little confused. You're waiting on Sunflower's decision about your credentialing. I mean, I'm assuming we don't have evidence that if we made all the changes you requested, that they would still allow you to be credentialed because they already have the information today about your status. Am I correct in all that assumption?
So the information that they have is I have submitted a brief letter explaining what happened to me in 2014, and that I was actually waiting. A part of this is that I was waiting on a potential modifications to the order. So I think I'm making a hypothesis here. I think that they are actually, in fact, waiting for this to occur.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
And then what about the third MCO?
I haven't seen anything come through on email saying that they've begun the review process that I'm aware of. I don't believe I've seen anything. So I can't speak much to that.
I would clarify that it's not so much about the past history that was the barrier mentioned by the first one that denied. It was that there was a quote encumbrance that was issued, and so it's anticipated without the encumbrance, then we would be more free to proceed and increase the odds of her being eligible for Medicaid reimbursement for services.
Sure. Do you feel, is it your understanding United will reverse their position then?
No, they will not.
Okay,
No.
so that's a done deal for 2 years. Is that what?
Yeah, unfortunately.
Okay. That's all I had. Thanks.
Thank you.
And Ms. Meikenhouse, my name is Lainey Barnard. I serve as general counsel for the board. I just have
Hi.
some questions. So
Sure.
tell me how far along you are in this plan. Have you been complying with the reporting requirements and the meetings and all the other aspects of the order?
Yes, ma'am, everything. I go to therapy monthly. I love therapy. I'm going to continue to go probably forever. I am starting EMDR actually Wednesday, which is another therapeutic model. Yeah, I'm 6 months, so I'm actually about like 6.5 months in. I started the job on June 14th, and then but didn't start actual technical clinical supervision until July 1st. So I'm about I'm about 6 months and 10 days into.
And just for clarification, this unencumbered, that would mean what you're requesting is that essentially your supervision be terminated. I mean, is that your understanding of what unencumbered means?
That's a really good question. David, I think you might be better to answer that because I don't want to make guesses.
It's actually the presence of the summary protective order that is viewed as the encumbrance. The supervision would continue regardless, as one, Grace is in my employ and is still learning the model. 2, with Eric Parks towards clinical licensure. So supervision would remain in place, however, perhaps not as
Okay.
frequently.
Yeah, I understand. And I should have clarified because there's supervision that's required by the order, and then she has different supervision that she's doing.
Correct.
For licensure.
Yeah,
So in essence, it's the order that would have to go away for her to be determined to be unencumbered. Is that your understanding? Everybody's understanding?
That is my understanding, yes.
yes, me as
Thank
well.
you.
Yeah.
I had a clarification question. The MCO who denied your credentialing, and said you could not be reevaluated for 2 years in regard to that.
That is correct.
I have a question. So since we're on here, I asked Leslie about this, but then she recommended that I bring it up in the meeting. So since I am starting EMDR on Wednesday of this week, would it be okay if I just did EMDR monthly instead, in lieu of seeing my other therapist who I've seen for like the last nearly 8 years, instead of both? It doesn't specify in the order, I don't think. It just says that the board wants me in therapy. So I just was wondering if I could do EMDR in lieu of, or maybe like switch every other week or every other month or something.
We can deliberate about that, Ms. Meichenhaus. So, and I
Okay.
think just to clarify, that was Leslie Allen that she asked that to, not me.
Oh,
So
yes.
just to make sure everyone is aware. That's okay. Yeah,
Yes.
it happens a lot.
Thank you.
Okay,
And
go
Ms.
ahead, Lainey.
Meichenhaus, it's Lainey Barnard again. I would just say that, the terms of that order that are in place are in place. So without getting into the details, and I've got it here, I'm very familiar with it, but I don't think anybody is in a position to tell you, yes, the scenario that you described would keep you in compliance with the order. And that's ultimately your responsibility to go through that order and the details of that order and make sure you're complying with it. So just don't want to lead you down a improper path here.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, I can understand where Ms. Meichenhaus, where you're coming from as far as the type of counseling. So that's something that I will address when we go into our executive session as well, just so we're all clear on what you're referring to.
Okay, I appreciate
Thank you.
that. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, Dave, I think if you would like to go ahead and read the motion, if we could go ahead and go into executive session, I think that would be great.
Okay. Would a board member like to make the following motion? Pursuant to KSA, I guess before I read the language, one thing would be to determine the amount of time that the executive session would last. And then based on that, we would announce what time the meeting would be open again. So maybe Lainey would be able to comment a little bit on an estimate on time.
Mm-hmm.
I would think maybe 15 minutes or so. That sounds, I know most of the board members are very familiar with Ms. Meichenhaus's case. So.
Okay. Well, just to allow a little bit of time to switch things back and forth, how about if we go ahead and do it from 20 minutes from now? So that would put it at 11:06. And board members, you do have the information for the executive session. You were sent an email with that this morning. So just go ahead and use that to do the conference call for the executive session if you make the motion. I'll go ahead and read the language now for the executive session motion. Pursuant to KSA 75-4319, I move the board recess into executive session for 20 minutes and reconvene the open meeting at 11:06 a.m. The meeting will be reconvened remotely by conference call at 1-877-278-8686, PIN 327072, and by Zoom as directed in the notice of meeting that was sent to individuals who requested notice and is published on the board's website, ksbsrb.kansas.gov. The justification is consultation that would be deemed privileged in the attorney-client relationship with the board's legal counsel, Assistant Attorney General Lainey Barnard and Jane, actually, I believe it would just be Lainey Barnard. The subject to be discussed in the executive session concerns requests for reconsideration. Board members who are included as client in the executive session would also include board staff who are included as the client in the executive session, also include David Fye and Leslie Allen. So would a board member like to make that motion?
I'll move.
we have a second?
This is Mary, second.
Thank you. So all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Same sign. Okay. The board will now recess into executive session to reconvene at 11:06 a.m.
Okay, and we will go ahead and terminate the conference call so that there's no issues that deconnecting or reconnecting. And then we will recall in the conference call at that time as well at 11:06.
Thank you, everyone.
Welcome to the Conference Nation conferencing service. Please enter your PIN number to join your conference. Please hold while we place you into your conference.
Okay, I'll call the board to order. Do we need to take another roll call, David?
I am doing a quick check.
Thank
to
you.
make sure that we have quorum. So I will tell you the number here in a second. Okay, we have 11 board members who are present, as well as BSRB staff, David Fye, Leslie Allen, and Cindy Darkle. I do not see Grace Meichenhaus or her supervisor, David Irwin, but everyone else who was on the call previously has rejoined. I don't see Bruce Nystrom, but I think he may be joining us over the conference call. So I will let you know if I hear a beep or if he enters the Zoom meeting after this point.
Okay, it's my understanding there was a motion from the executive session. Is there someone that would like to make that motion?
Yeah, this is Mary. I'd like to make a motion to deny the request to set aside the current SPO.
This is Rick. I'll second.
And I'm sorry, it's Lainey. Can I just jump in here real
Yes.
quick? There was a SPO originally, and then after the hearing, there was a final order. So just so
It's final order.
Final order.
I'll
yeah.
modify that language, Lainey. Thank you. I'll make a motion to deny the request to set aside the final order.
Thank you. Rick has seconded.
I second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed, same sign. Okay. Motion granted. All right, we will move on to new business.
And I just wanted to, sorry, before we move forward, I wanted to see if there were any other motions for after that executive session. So.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to I'll put forth another motion. A motion to allow the order to be modified to permit Ms. Meichenhaus to conduct some private practice hours with all the other stipulations of the final order in place.
I second that motion.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. All right, thanks, Mary. All right, now new business. Thank you for catching that, David. A little fast on the draw there. So this is just some housekeeping kind of thing. So the Behavioral Analyst Advisory Committee made some recommendations for new members. So as chair, I would like to appoint Allison Bell, Emily Kessler, Christine Marie Steele, E. Alice Zank to the Behavioral Analyst Advisory Committee. And then Social Work Advisory Committee recommendations as well were placed. And I would like to appoint Sarah Behrens, Mary Gill, Catherine Reck, and Eric Schonecker to the Social Work Advisory Committee. Okay. Official, congratulations to all those people. So the next thing on the agenda is Executive Director Performance Evaluation. Can't even say it. So executive session might be necessary here to go into. David and I kind of went over that. If there is an executive session that is recommended, that we would take a few minutes to do that, and we would not have board staff on the call. So what do you want to do, board?
And Leslie, do you want me just to preface this real quick?
Yeah, that'd be great. Sorry,
Sure.
I didn't, add to it.
That's okay. And Bruce Nystrom has re-entered the call, so he is on the Zoom as well.
Mhm.
So in the previous board governance policy, which you'll be getting later on, that has now been split into two documents, one board member expectations, there was some language that calls for an annual performance review of the executive director. And so even though the language called for one to happen, it really didn't specify how that performance review or that annual evaluation would be conducted. So we did want to go ahead and bring it back as an item for the board's consideration. And then I'll go ahead and turn it back over to you, Leslie. In terms of, we have our legal counsel here. One of the matters that could be heard in the executive session does involve personnel matters. And so that gives the board some flexibility if they want to discuss a topic like this in executive session. So we do have an executive session memo or a motion put together. So if the board does want to discuss this topic in executive session, just let me know and I can ask if a board member wants to make that motion.
And David, it's Lainey and Leslie. So is the conversation today how this process should occur or what it should entail, or is everybody
Can
gonna
we
go
talk
how
about
great
that?
you are?
Can we talk about that right now, or do we have to be in executive session to talk
No,
about that? I guess that's
You
my
don't have to
question.
be. I mean, if you just want to talk about the manual and what you want that to look like, that evaluation process, I don't think there's really any reason to be in executive session if you're just talking
Okay.
about
In
how-
general.
Right, but I think
Okay.
when you actually start doing those things, having those conversations, then it's probably a good idea to go in executive session first.
So as David alluded to, this has not been conducted, a performance evaluation on an executive director for, I think, over 10 years, possibly. And so we wanted to, we're doing a lot of housekeeping since David has come on board, and we're wanting to get things back in order. And so since that was part of the board governance document, we thought that we would approach this, and how we want to approach the performance evaluation can go different ways. We have a performance review document that we could follow. It talks about the chair appointing 2 board members to form a committee to gather information and then provide feedback. Feedback can be with the board directly to the executive director, and I believe it could also just go formally to the executive director, not through a board meeting. So there are different ways that we can conduct business, and I guess I needed your guidance on how you would like to have that completed, if at all. I think that it also opens it up to, we don't have to do anything formal. We could just put together something from the board that says, David, you're doing a great job, and here are the reasons why. So very informal as well. How would you like to proceed?
Is there a standard amongst other executive directors that we can maybe refer to?
David, are you aware? I was going to ask that same question. Are you aware what other agencies do, or is this process in place? It doesn't, just with my other boards, it's not something that I've come across.
I'm not familiar if there's a standardized process. I know the Department of Administration says that all employees should receive an annual performance evaluation. And so as a state employee, that totally makes sense for me to receive one as well under the Department of Administration. But in terms of how it would be done, there's really not a lot of, I haven't seen a standardized method for it.
I have the document that Dave sent. I don't know if everyone received it. I was going to try and bring it up. Is there a way to share that, David? Do you have that? Or allow me to share?
Sure, you should be able to share. Yeah, I was going through some old files, and I did find one from several years back that had some different things to be commented on. So there is an example of one in the past, but I'm not sure the last time that it was actually used for this type of evaluation.
So I can read just briefly. It says 35% agency administration, talks about board relations, agency management, public relations, 15%, relationship with the legislature, liaison and outreach activities, licensure functions, 20%, licensing, disciplinary actions, and then fiscal management, 10%, personnel administration, 10%, and work factors, 10%. So it describes a little more detail in each of those sections about what's the expectations of the executive director in those functions. And that's somewhat of a position description. So it would be based on those items briefly, I guess, is what the document alludes to. I at least move that we discuss it. Maybe we need to be in executive session and just discuss it real briefly, if you guys don't mind. That way we can have some open dialogue about it, and then we can decide how to move forward. Would you be open to that? Okay. So David, if you have that information, and would we use the same link that we just came from in executive session?
Yeah, you would use the same conference call information. I did talk to Laney about that a little earlier. So she is going to be the host of the executive session, because we won't have staff on that call. It'll just be board and legal counsel. But I do have language for an executive session motion. I just need to know about how long you would like that executive session to last.
Okay. I guess, should we say 15 minutes again, board? Does that sound okay? Just to get an idea of how we want to move forward. Okay. And I think staff can start that, Laney, and then get off of the call, if that makes it any easier.
That may be a good idea. I feel like we did that one time. David went in and then jumped out for after a hearing, I think. So that might be the safest time, most time efficient way to do that.
Yeah.
So if you don't mind, David.
Okay, then I'll say in the language, the board staff who are included as the client in the executive session are myself, and then after the meeting has started, I'll go ahead and exit the call. So.
Dave, Dave, this is Leslie. Do you want me to start the call, or are you going to start the call?
Actually, Leslie, you
are over 50. Please press 1 now.
Bruce, your line is picking up some audio.
You might want to mute.
Leslie, if you don't mind doing that, so I'll just put Leslie on there.
Okay.
So that way I won't be part of the conference call at all, and I'll just have her start and log in as host, and then she can exit when you start discussion. So.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Leslie.
So
all
here's.
Right, so we have to do the motion.
Yeah, so about 15 minutes, and then you want me to add about 3 minutes for time back and forth? Sure,
that'd be great. Thank you.
Let's do maybe 18 minutes, and so it's 11:20 right now, so about 11:38. All right, so here is the language of the proposed motion. Would a board member like to make the following motion? Pursuant to KSA 75-4319, I move that the board recess into executive session for 15 minutes and reconvene the open meeting at 11:38 a.m. The meeting will be reconvened remotely by conference call at 1-877-278-8686, PIN 327072, and by Zoom as directed by the notice of hearing or notice of meeting that was sent to individuals who requested notice and is published on the board's website, ksbsrb.kansas.gov. The justification for closure is to discuss personnel matters of non-elected personnel. The board's legal counsel, Assistant Attorney General Laney Barnard and Jane Weiler are to be, actually just Laney Barnard is to be included in the executive session. The subject to be discussed in the executive session is personnel evaluations. Board staff who are included in the executive session are Leslie Allen. So would a board member like to make that motion?
Ms. Carolyn, so moved.
And a second?
I'll second.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Same sign. Okay, we'll move to the executive session.
And Laney, you may want to go ahead and mute. Are there any individuals in the conference call? I think all board members have rejoined the Zoom except for Andrea Perdomo Morales. And is there anyone on the conference call? Okay.
I received an email from Andrea. I'm not sure if she's going to get back on or if that was the last executive session, but she had sent the email saying she might not be able to get back on after the executive session. Dave, you might have received the same email.
Okay. Yeah, it looks like she won't be available afterwards.
Okay.
All board members who could attend are currently back on the call.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we're just going to move forward with the board member advisory committee member training. So we'll call the board back to order.
Okay. So
if you're ready, Dave, I should have asked you.
No, that's quite all right. Yes, so so last year there was the board had asked for some training for new board members and new advisory committee members. And part of that was having legal counsel for the board do a presentation. And at the time, the board was favorable with having counsel attend each one of the advisory committee meetings and talk to certain issues like the Kansas Open Meeting Act, and then also the Kansas Administrative Procedures Act, CAPA. So we had CAPA and CORA and also COMA. So there's also a records component to that. But there's also some other items that would be of interest to advisory committee members in terms of, and board members, things that would fall under individuals working for the state. And so I wanted to go ahead and check in with the board as this is the start of another year to see your preference on how you would like, if you would like training to be done again this year for all board members and advisory committee members, and if so, how you would like that to take place. One option that I wanted to throw out for the board is Mark Skoglund. He's the director of governmental ethics. He sometimes speaks to groups, but he also makes handouts. And I could collect a handout from him on those general items that could affect individuals working for the state. We also do have a very good document that was put forward by our legal counsel last year. And I would be happy to, since I'm already going to be attending those advisory committee meetings anyway, I'd be happy to attend those and sort of give a shortened version or a summary hitting the high points of that document while also providing a copy of it to board members and advisory committee members at that meeting. But in case you wanted a different level of training this year, I wanted to bring it for your discussion to let you know if, I'd be happy to do this if you'd like me to. If you would like to do a different type of training, that's fine too. We just want to go ahead and do whatever the board would like us to do.
Well, when we discussed this, the last training, if you're on different advisory committees, you have the same training, and it seemed to be lengthy and a lot of information. So when I was discussing it, I thought it might be a good idea to maybe narrow down some of the highlights, and then, as David said, send the email out to the advisory committee members and make sure they had the documentation if they wanted it in writing as well, but then add those additional pieces like David had mentioned. So that's where that kind of came from. So I think if we streamline it a little bit, I think it will make more of an impact and it will stick a little better with advisory committees. So what do you all think of that?
This is Carol, and I agree with you 100%. It was so much information that within, 15 minutes, we were just kind of, your brain was full of numbers or statute numbers. I was very, so I agree. I think we need to organize that and kind of streamline that a bit. Also, I think it'd be kind of neat to put some expectations. I know that we're looking at some draft, documents on expectations of board members, but one thing that I see that we don't really have are just real simple things like, call in if you can't come, attendance is a real important, and come prepared to represent your area of concerns. I don't know that we should have to do that, but I think that it's, in my way of thinking, it's been kind of problematic. Members haven't called in, they just don't show, and some do, so I think some just general expectations without making it too demanding, because I know that on the one expectations for the board is that, no more than one absence, and I don't know if we need to speak to attendance, because that's real important, that they be there.
I agree.
I don't know what number, but
yeah, I think we have a draft of that too. I think that Dave has put together for us too. So that would be, yeah.
Good.
Mary, I think, it was really important for us to get training last year because there had been such a gap. I am in favor of some annual refresher review of the highlights, high level review. I like the idea of getting a handout that's speaking to specific things we should pay attention to as working for the state. So I'm in favor of that sort of the streamlined process and annually.
And this is Lainey. I'm familiar with that document. I think that you saw that Jan presented last year. And so that, I think everything in that document is good information and good to have around as a resource. And how I've done it with different boards is that I kind of do a gloss over of these are the things that are in this document. And if this comes up, you can go back to this section of this document because you're not going to remember it all. But having that document as a resource is very helpful, and just knowing generally what's in there if you have a question about something. So I think that's a good idea. David, Mark Scoglin came, he was going to email me his PowerPoint presentation, but he came to Tech Professions meeting last month and did a presentation. And I think that's all very helpful information as well. So I'm sure he'd be happy to do that if you asked him nicely.
This is Rick. I agree with all of that. I think we can really impress upon the advisory board members the issues regarding attendance and preparation. That's frankly been a little bit of an issue for my advisory committee at times. The other thing is really highlighting with that general overview. Streamlining is great, but given that a lot of our advisory committee members will have other advocacy interests, we need to be really clear on what constitutes a conflict of interest, right? That was a thing, right? So we need to make sure that we're all clear on what our roles are and when we can speak for or not. So yeah, we have a whole bunch of new, I think across all of our professions, we have a lot of new people who have not had what we had last year, right? So I think we need a pretty good primer.
So David Fye, do you have what you need as far as how to move forward then? Okay.
Yeah, I think that'd be
yeah, not maybe the length of the last one, but maybe some highlights, providing the documentation, a handout, focusing on conflict of interest and expectations of advisory committee members. Okay, thank you. All right, the next one is, sorry, go ahead, Dave.
Excuse me, I was just going to add, yeah, we just had 3 new members join our advisory committee, and so going back over some of that will be really important. But I agree that the full training was really long. A lot of it had more to do with being on the full board than an advisory committee member. So hitting those highlights would be great on an annual basis for the advisory committee members.
I like the idea of a visual too. A PowerPoint's always really pretty neat when you're taking in information. That's not necessary, but it's helpful to me.
I like that idea. Right. Anything further on that? All right, board consideration of bills during the 22 legislative session. Dave Fye, you're up
Okay.
again.
So as I mentioned in my report, this is the first day of the 2022 legislative session. I will be tracking bills that deal with mental health topics, the professions under the Bsrb, the agency specifically if we're named in a bill, and also general regulatory board related bills. So these bills sometimes are offered, requested in committees, and then scheduled for a hearing with very little time in between. So the reason I talked with Leslie C. Wester and asked for this to be on the new business section of the agenda is because I just wanted to verify that your preference for bills that were relevant to the Bsrb this year, to see if you would like me to go ahead and use the method we used last year. So last year, when there were bills that came up that were relevant to the Bsrb that we were able to discuss, and then I could bring to the board and ask, would you like me to bring forward testimony on behalf of the board? Would you like to take a position on any of these bills? What we did is we tried to schedule a meeting where a majority of the board could meet so you could take official action. And then I explained the bills, or we had legal counsel explain the bills. And then based on the result of those meetings, we went ahead and presented testimony to the legislature. So that does mean there would be some additional meetings. Those board meetings would be tailored to mostly they're just specific to the bills that would be heard. So they're shorter. They're sometimes 30 minutes, sometimes an hour. But since we're at the start of the next legislative session, I wanted to check with all of you to see if you would prefer to have that take place like we did last year, or if you would like me to use another method going forward this year.
I thought the process worked very well last year. So that would be my vote.
I agree.
I agree. It was great communication.
I will admit it's difficult to get so many people on one call for something that sometimes it was an emergency, but I think this board is amazing and it worked out really well. And they were able to, you all were able to make yourselves available. So that was, I think it worked out well, my opinion as well. Anyone think that there is any changes or anything different that you want to do with that? Okay, there we go.
I wanted to echo what you said, Leslie. I really do thank the board members. This is a very active board, and some of those meetings last year were at early times. So I know it's difficult to schedule some of those, but I will do my best to keep track of any bills that I believe will be relevant to the agency and then bring them forward with, if we do have enough time. Some of them may get scheduled with too close of a window that we don't get the opportunity to provide legislation, but if we can, I'll go ahead and keep you informed as best I can.
Thank you. Okay, so the next one is interaction between requirements for provisional and the 2021 House Bill 2066. There's some information that David wants to bring up that's there, additional information on these two colliding. That's a good way of putting it.
Yes, and I'll go ahead and set the stage here, and then I'll defer to Leslie Allen, Assistant Director and Licensing Manager for the agency. But as you're aware, the legislature passed a bill in front of the 2021 legislative session. It was House Bill 2066, which primarily expedited the licensing timeframe for military members and military spouses. But it had some other effects in terms of individuals who are residing in the state of Kansas and those who intend to reside in the state of Kansas. And the majority of the effect of the bill has dealt with reciprocity applications. There is so the main function of the bill as it relates to reciprocity is that it provides another method where individuals can receive licensure if they meet all of the other requirements and they have a license in another jurisdiction that has a similar scope of practice to the licenses under the Bsrb. It talks about having no disciplinary record and some other requirements, but one of the items is that they had to have practiced in that jurisdiction for at least a year. So putting that into one side, you have provisional licenses that are in statute for the Bsrb, and while they are rare, what the language in statute says for these provisional licenses is that they are intended for someone who is within about a year of meeting the educational requirements in statute for obtaining a license. And sometimes you would see these where someone was maybe close, but they were a class short or something like that. But essentially they would be within about a year of meeting the qualifications for licensure. So taking these two pieces together, it creates a little bit of an issue that we wanted to bring to the board because we were trying to, as best as possible, make these two pieces fit. But we also wanted to go with your direction on this item as well. And so the main issue is that this new bill requires someone to have practiced for at least a year, and the provisional licenses are for someone who is within about a year of meeting all of the requirements. So if they go together and overlap, it could possibly create the situation where someone could be licensed in another jurisdiction, and then while they're fulfilling that year requirement, they would get a provisional license under the Bsrb without actually having fulfilled that year-long practice requirement. So we wanted to go ahead and bring that to your attention to get your thoughts. Currently, there's not a lot of provisional licenses under the Bsrb. There's only, I think, 3 currently. But since the two components of this interacted in this way, we wanted to bring it to your attention and make you aware, and then get your feedback on this. And Leslie, I'll go ahead and defer to you. If there's any parts of that I missed, feel free to go ahead and discuss that.
I'm sorry for my voice. I apologize ahead of time. The one thing I would say is that in the past, the provisional license has been used when someone has 3 years of practice instead of 4 years for reciprocity, that they would be allowed to use the last year and practice in Kansas on a provisional license in order to bring them over the 4 and meet reciprocity requirements. So it has been used for time. I just wanted to be clear on that.
So David and I spoke about this earlier in the week, and as I look at this is Lainey, by the way, they're 2 different tracks. If you want to come in and apply for a provisional license, you come in and apply for a provisional license, and your language in those statutes are the board may, it's optional. You don't have to. So if somebody wants to come in and say the 3 out of 4 years and request a provisional license from the board, that's fine. They can do that. And then the board can or cannot grant that. So that's one scenario.
Can I say something? That's
Sure,
not how
please.
it's been done previously.
I'm sorry.
That's not how we've done it. They apply for reciprocity. If they meet, we license them. If they could meet with a provisional license, we offer it. So it's not.
They're coming in under reciprocity.
Yes.
And you're saying you're almost there. You're a little bit shy. We're going to give you this provisional license.
Exactly.
So I think that is one avenue, right? And then your House Bill 2066, there's speed mechanisms and things like that. So any application that comes in isn't necessarily isn't a House Bill 2066 application. You need to apply under House Bill 2066. So then if you're applying under House Bill 2066, then you have that specific requirement that you worked in at least 1 year in the occupation. And so if the answer is to that and they applied under 2066, you deny it. But then they could, somebody has worked for 3 out of 4 years. I mean, somebody's not coming in with 0 out of 1, like 0 years of experience, right? I mean, so I don't see them interacting or coming together. I don't see a situation where somebody would come apply So if they apply under 2066 and they don't have that year, at least 1 year, they're done in 2066. If they are coming in reciprocity for a provisional license, I mean, you're not going to give that to them unless they're at that 3 out of 4 years or some sort of substantial portion of whatever their requirement is, right?
Well, I think part of this is when the board met in the fall, we discussed provisional licenses and we asked the board, would you like each of these situations to be brought to the board for review, or would you like to delegate authority to the agency to make these decisions? And in most cases, for provisional licensing decisions, we're completely comfortable in reviewing and making that determination. But given how unique the situation is, we wanted to bring it to the attention of the board so that you were all aware of how this potentially could work for the provisional licenses and to get your thoughts. In general, provisional licenses, we will still handle under that delegation, but given this unique kind of quirk in the way that these two might affect each other, we wanted to make the board aware and get some board comments. So.
I guess my question is, what are we considering as potential remedies? Is it that we would review any case rather than delegating that has this kind of potential intersection? Are you advocating for, going to the legislature to make a statute clarification?
Well, I guess so. In terms of the provisional license policy, I think that's kind of what it would come down to. So 2066 is in statute, and it does say the board or regulatory boards shall XYZ. And so we are required to fulfill those requirements of 2066. In terms of the provisional licenses, if it comes down to the board may make determinations in certain cases, we wanted to kind of get some input from you. Do you want us to exercise authority to make them work together if the provisional license is still sort of a decision by the board in terms of a discretionary type thing? We wanted to hear from you. If there were things that were automatic and we had to follow, then we would say, do you want us to put forward some legislation to do an exception or something like that? But if there is discretion as far as our provisional license policy, given how unique this was and the potential that individuals could be licensed without having fulfilled the practice requirement that 2066 had on its own, we just kind of wanted to let you have a discussion on this topic. And I realize it's complex, and so if you do have questions, we'd be happy to answer those. But this is kind of a unique situation where we were taking two pieces and trying to logically fit them together, but it was enough of an issue that we wanted to make you aware of it, for one thing, and then also collect any feedback that you had.
My thinking is if the language says that the board may, in regards to the provisional license, doesn't that still allow us to make those decisions? So if we change that with the legislature, then it opens it up to the legislature making that decision for us. So I would choose to keep the language as the board may in the provisional licenses. However, I guess moving forward, do we as a board want Leslie Allen to bring each one of those cases moving forward, those licensees requesting provisional that don't have that full year with the House bill? Do we want to review those each one moving forward? Right now we only have 3, but that's going to open it up. Sorry, David.
I was just curious how often the provisional licensure request occurred.
Right now there's only 3. Go ahead, Leslie.
There have been more.
Yeah.
They're already expired. It's not that many. I mean, if we open it up for 2066, there will be more because people, and it's not even it. I don't know. I guess the way it's written differently. So this, never mind. That doesn't matter. It would bring it up more often. I can't say how many, but.
Yeah, and I don't know that I can, I mean, I know that I can't speak for the legislature per se, but the other language in that bill leads me to believe that this type of scenario was not what they envisioned by the bill. In looking at the bill, there is some language following that section on reciprocity that talks about if someone is just shy of meeting the qualifications in 2066, you could potentially offer, it says that you may offer a probationary license, but a probationary license has certain conditions and it should last no longer than 6 months. So the fact that there was some language in there about probationary, I don't think that they had envisioned that there would be sort of coming from the other direction, this provisional license possibility. I believe that their intent was to have someone practice for at least that year. And then, that's my interpretation just from reading through it and taking that language and then the other language in the bill into account.
Yeah, and House Bill 2066, you're not getting anything unless you have a valid license and you worked at least 1 year in the occupation. So I don't know if you can see this, my
Except
handy
at
like
the
flow
end.
chart, but if you're coming in 2066, you work a license and you worked in the other state for at least a year. So if you get to that, yes, valid from a state with a similar scope of practice, no, and then there's some provisions about military spouse or service member spouse, but similar scope of practice, then it's at that point, only at that point that you get to that probationary license. And then if you can add those additional training testing, but you don't get down that chain, that chart, unless you have that 1 year. So again, I don't know, like linking up 2066 with saying that somebody wants to tie it to a provisional license, and the purpose of the provisional license is to help somebody who's almost there. I don't know how somebody is almost there when they, haven't done that year. So I don't see them intersecting. I can see an argument for that, but it's you're either coming in this way or this way.
I guess I'm just go back to the fact that we've delegated that authority for those provisional licenses, which I think is fine. Any unusual cases, I would suggest bringing to the board like we do others.
Would it even be something I should bring to the board? Or would it just be an automatic no?
The way it sounds that from what Lainey's describing, it's an automatic no.
Yeah, I'm just trying to.
Except if it's 6 months, because there's 6 months in the bill. That's where I'm getting confused.
So the probationary basis is a 6 months or less, and that's where you can add the additional things, the education training. But that's only after they've shown they've worked for at least a year, no disciplines, crimes, and that their state, their licensing state has a similar scope of practice.
Why would they need 6 months then? I don't understand.
So so if the answer, the ish, so similar scope. So you could have a similar scope of practice, but maybe there's something that's a little different in Kansas. So then you give them a probationary period to go get trained or learn, this quirky thing that we have in Kansas, just to get them up to speed with the Kansas standard. Even though their state had a similar scope of practice, there may be this one little nuance area that Kansas has that their state didn't train on.
So maybe I would suggest that David, you and the staff can work with Lainey and see if there's anything further that the board needs to be aware of. It doesn't sound like we're moving forward or need to maybe move forward in this, unless the board has any other comments about it.
And all of these cases are very fact specific. So it might just be easier if something goofy comes in, Leslie, we can talk about it. If it's something that's not easily resolved, then we can bring it to the board, and just as these things come up, maybe see how they go.
Okay.
We will keep you updated on these going forward, or if there's unique situations. So.
Yeah, because however, the board did say that we delegated authority, so now we're back to seeing those.
Unless it's
individual
really
things.
weird,
So I think,
then you want to see it.
So however you want to do that. So, okay. Thank you for that discussion. So we move on to discussion on types of licenses needed for pre-approved continuing ed courses.
Yeah, so there was a question that was brought up in terms of why so currently right now under the Bsrb, there is a way to get pre-approval as a provider or pre-approval for a course for continuing education, but both of those only apply to the social work profession. And there was a question about that. And in our review, I believe it's because, at least in part, because representatives from those professions had requested those things to be put into place. And so for some of those programs, you need to have a social work connected to the program for it to meet the requirements to be a pre-approved program. And there was a question about could other types of licensees fulfill those requirements, and currently no, but we wanted to bring it to the board for discussion to see if you would like to maybe pursue changes to allow another type of professional under the Bsrb to fill that position rather than a social worker, or do you want to start the discussion about if you want to have other changes such as pre-approved providers for continuing education for other professions, under other professions or for other courses. And I'll defer to Leslie Allen on this topic a little bit more too, but I think that was the general question. And then it was open for the board to have discussion on that if they want to keep this as a social work item or to open it up and to allow other professionals to fulfill some of those requirements. And Leslie Allen, you and I talked about this beforehand. Did I miss any part of that you understood?
No, just that the pre-approved provider, there's a pre-approved course, and that doesn't specify that it has to be a social work. The pre-approved provider who everything that comes out of that business is pre-approved for social work continuing education, that a social worker has to be part of the process of establishing or compiling the requirements for the course. And the question was asked if other professions could be used in that position as well.
Leslie, just
Are there two questions then? Is one of them that it's more than just the social work that you can say they're approved for, the entity is approved for, or is that could an LMFT sit on that continuing education providership instead of a social worker? Are there two questions?
No, that's
the second question. Okay, the second
others
question.
would require regulation change for all of them.
Which I do think it's actually interesting that came up in a recent conversation last week about, do we just have to contact the board every single time? People are trying to figure out their continuing ed because there's so many that have the social work approval already.
So to clarify, then Leslie Allen was saying any profession can go through the pre-approval for the course, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But to be on the social work pre-approved list for CEUs, they must have something to do with social work. Am I correct in that?
No, the profession, there can be many different professions in the group designing the courses,
okay,
but at least one has to be a social worker.
I see.
And so that question is, can that social worker be an MFT instead?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Or something else?
Well, I certainly would be in favor of that change. Knowing that my organization is one of these providers. And so, from time to time when people change and shift out, there's all sorts of licensed professionals, but I'm curious, what the social work the social work representatives think about that in here. I mean, the content is stipulated. You have to meet so many requirements anyway in order to ensure that you're providing an appropriate continuing education. But I think the more we can, again, get resources in front of licensees and professionals, it's probably a good thing.
So I think I'm hearing again that the idea is that anyone can apply, and then are we going to open that up to different providers to also be included? Carolyn, did you have a comment?
Well, I think that to have the pre-approved course is a real important thing in our field. And I'm a single CEU provider, and I submit, yearly to, my workshop, and it's approved. So I like that. I don't know how other people feel, other professionals feel, but I think they should be looked at. Some of them are not related to the field at all. So that screening is necessary, I think. Maybe on a small amount to come in.
Well, I don't want to muddy the waters, but I thought that and I asked Dave about this too, Leslie Allen, you might know, and maybe even Deb. I thought when we changed over the software program, didn't we have a training on tracking CEUs and getting approval for each profession through that program? That
We discussed doing that program, but we never did.
Okay. So maybe that's something very futuristic that might help with the situation as well. I don't know.
So, I mean, my understanding is that it would take a regulation change, because it is in regulation that an approved provider has to have a social worker as part of the main group of people. Can't think of the word I want, I apologize.
Okay.
So it would require that would require a regulation change to say that any of the Bsrb professions, or if that choice was made. So it would require a regulation change, but not a statute or anything.
This is Mary. I'm in favor of that. I think it makes sense. And I would say I would be willing to look at actual statutory language if it's only limited, if that's where the limit is, that other disciplines that are all represented here on the board could also have a providership.
Okay.
Which I know would be a different topic and a much deeper conversation. It just is a question that comes up all the time. Why is this person approved for social work CEs, but then I have to figure out, does that work for my MFT or other discipline or my professional counseling?
This came up at our advisory committee, and we discussed it with Leslie, and it sounded like at the time that social workers were the only one that really requested that. But now it makes sense to open that up to all the professionals.
So do we need a motion then to move to make the changes in the reg?
So this is the first time the board has heard this conversation. So it's your preference, of course, but what we could do is we could draft some potential language so you can see how this would look, and then bring it back to a future board meeting.
Okay.
And then if you're okay with that language, then we could move forward then.
Okay, is that okay with board? Yes, I see thumbs up from Bruce. Any opposed to that? Okay, we'll wait to hear back on that then. Thank you. Review of draft guidance document for attendees of board meetings and advisory committee meetings. So we did kind of briefly touch on this earlier, but Dave has drawn up a draft of some changes or potential changes.
Yeah, and this relates to sort of an effort to as we have more people, I think, viewing the meetings through the YouTube channel and more people who have contacted us with suggestions or feedback or questions, I believe we will be seeing more people provide public comment or request to provide public comment at board meetings and advisory committee meetings. And I think for individuals who are outside of this realm, I think there can be some confusion on sort of what our function is as a regulatory board and as your function as the board and advisory committees as well. And so just to make sure that we are helping individuals who may want to bring information to the board and advisory committees, and also letting them know sort of our process and why we can receive certain information in certain ways and why other methods are preferred for other things. I went ahead and I drafted a 2-page document. It's titled Dsrb Guidelines for Public Attendees at Meetings. This is a draft version. But what this document does is it describes the Bsrb first. It talks about the Kansas Open Meeting Act and that it doesn't require there to be public comment time for individuals, but that the Bsrb is a public protection agency, and we want to ensure that individuals are treated consistently and respectfully. And so we have drafted some guidance document to provide in terms of our general procedures for those people attending board meetings and advisory committee meetings, as well as other topics relevant for public comment at those meetings. And so the document describes a little bit of the mechanics for individuals attending in-person meetings. And it notes, when we have in-person meetings, those would be at the Bsrb board office or the agency's office here. And we would make effort to allow in-person attendees when we have an in-person meeting, though it does note that at the current time, all meetings are being held remotely. Then there's also some language that talks about the procedure when we have virtual meetings, and it provides some basic Zoom etiquette and also explains why in terms of time restrictions, and it notes that the chair would be the one approving whether public comment would be allowed or not, and then if so, how long that would be. It talks about only those individuals who had received the approval to provide public comment would get the Zoom information that the board has, as most attendees have public access to the meeting through the YouTube channel and also through the conference call. And then there's some general guidelines as far as individuals attending meetings and making sure they have electronics turned off and things like that and avoiding side conversations. On the second page of the document, it talks about the procedure for public comment, and it walks through that the chair of the board and chairs of advisory committees will determine if public comment will be allowed at each meeting. And then if it is allowed, the chair determines how much time is available for public comment. It describes the process of which individuals should follow if they want to provide public comment at board meetings or advisory committee meetings in terms of contacting me, and then contacting me with enough time so that I can go ahead and talk to the chair and let them know that individuals have requested to provide public comment. It says in the meeting, in the notice to me, that they should mention which meeting they want to provide the public comment, and then a general topic. It notes the importance of providing written testimony so that that can be forwarded to members of the committees ahead of time so that they can be aware of the content and be better prepared to engage if that happens at the meetings. And then it also notes that I'll follow up after talking with the chair, with the individuals who had requested to provide public comment, and then make sure they have the information they need for the meeting. And then at the meeting itself, it goes through the procedure which the chair would recognize individuals at the appropriate time for public comment. It says that there's really no swearing of an oath, but by appearing, individual presenters note that the information they present is truthful and based on facts that are capable of verification or offered in good faith. It mentions that presenters should bring to the board or the committee's attention any necessary corrections, the information they presented previously, and that individuals presenting public comment should avoid exceeding the time they've been permitted and should conduct themselves in a respectful manner when addressing the board and the chair and the members of the board and advisory committees. And then it notes that at the conclusion of the public comment, the chair may allow time for questions or move on to the next item on the agenda. And then there's some language here about topics relevant for public comment. It clarifies that the Bsrb is a state agency created by the legislature, and thus we're governed by statutes and regulations. It notes that information presented to the board or advisory committee should be relevant to the statutes or regulations governing the agency, and that the chair reserves the right to limit testimony that is in the judgment of the chair, not relevant to matters germane to the board or the advisory committees. It provides some common examples of past public comment topics, including requested changes to statutes or regulations relating to qualifications for licensure, fees, continuing education, or unprofessional conduct of practitioners. It notes that the BSRB highly values receipt of information that a licensee may have violated statutes or regulations for a profession regulated by the agency. However, information on a specific practitioner licensed by the BSRB, information that's relevant to an active investigation, or information that could be grounds for a complaint against a practitioner should be provided to the BSRB through the submission of a complaint or a report of alleged violation, rather than through public comment at a board or advisory committee meeting. And it says that the use of a standardized process for receiving this information, investigating allegations, and determining possible discipline helps to ensure that both members of the public and licensees are treated consistently and fairly. And it provides instructions as far as how individuals can do a report of alleged violation or complaint on the agency's website, and it provides a link to how they can access those materials. So this was something that I put together in an effort to provide some guidance to public attendees, while also explaining why we wanted to follow some of these procedures. This is a draft copy. If you would like anything added to this or removed from this, feel free to have a discussion on this. There really wasn't a document like this previously, but I thought having something like this, and if the board wants to go forward with it, having it posted could be really beneficial, and I think could avoid some confusion and also provide some protections so that members of the public, don't find themselves in a situation that would be embarrassing, but also would also provide some guidance to licensees on what they can expect when individuals do come before the board and advisory committees. So this is an effort to be open about what we expect and then why we would ask these things to be in public comment time. So I wanted to provide it to you for your review. I went ahead and forwarded it to our legal counsel ahead of time for their review as well. And then I asked Cindy and Joan, our investigators, to look it over too, to see if they had any additional comments. And so please let me know if you have comments or thoughts on this, and just think it could be a really helpful item for the public.
This is Carolyn. I read through it and I'm not a legal counsel. I think it's a very, very well written, clear expectations. And I'm so glad that we have something now, because we didn't before. And I don't think people were quite aware of the do's and the don'ts. So I didn't find anything that I'd want to change on the document, but that's just my opinion, reading that. Very thorough.
I agree.
David, it's Lainey. The only one thing that I thought about when I read through it, maybe just something to explain the difference between the YouTube and the Zoom. And the reason why they're getting the Zoom is because they'll be able to speak. Because at first the language, if you can't be identified, we're not letting you in. That kind of was like, oh, what's that? But it's because you can go to the YouTube. So just maybe something to clarify that's why the Zoom is extra special, because you would be speaking, and otherwise you can call in or watch it on the YouTube channel. But that was my only thought. I thought it looked great.
I guess the conversation for the board today that I would ask, do you want more time to think about this document and review it? If you want me to make any changes, let me know. If you're ready, or if you want this to be something that's an official document, we can also go ahead and use that or modify it. So, but since I know we didn't have a document like this beforehand, if you need more time to think about it, I definitely understand, but I thought this would be helpful. So.
I'm fine with it as written.
I agree. It's a good document. It's fine with it.
I like the document too, but as it maybe a year from now or 2 years from now, or whenever we get so fortunate as to be out of this, just the statement, you'll have to update it at some point. If we leave that note at the present time, the board meetings and advisory meetings are being held remotely, that might just be something you want to remove, only because then you will have to update the document. Other than that, that's just feedback, not anything that would keep me from approving the document as written.
Okay. So anyone opposed to moving forward and approving this document for Dave? I don't believe we have to take a vote since it's draft language. Is that correct, David?
I mean, if it's by consensus to go ahead and adopt it, that would be fine too. So just to make sure that I understand, so I do understand the comment that Lainey made concerning clarifying the difference between the Zoom versus the YouTube and why those are different. So just want to make sure it sounds like the board is okay with me going forward with making that change and then going ahead and posting it on the board's website. Is that good?
Yes.
Yeah.
Then I'll go ahead and do that, and I'll put the date that it was adopted. And then should any items come up that would need to be added to it in the future, we can always revise it and then make some changes or use some additional language. So.
Great. So before moving to old business, does anyone need a break? Would you like to break for 5 minutes? Yes, I see a thumbs up. So is 5 minutes okay? Restroom break? Okay. So we'll be back in 5.
We'll be back at 12:35. Okay, I just did a quick check and everyone is back. Well, at least everyone is on the Zoom call. Some people may not be
Right.
back to their screens.
All right. Thank you. Okay, so we'll just go ahead and proceed to old business, reviewing expectations for board members. This was the board governance policy that we tabled until today.
Yes, so I'm going to try to separate it out as best I can, but old business items A and B sort of interrelate. So A and B are what is left after the board's action on the previous board governance policy. So you do have separate documents. The first is labeled expectations for board members, and the second is labeled advisory committee policy. So I've highlighted in green some of the new language, but there was also some items that were deleted, or there was really no way to reflect those unless I did strike throughs, which would make it a little tricky to read. So honestly, the best way to read a summary of the changes is from the minutes from the October 25th meeting. I put in a bulleted list of the different items of the changes. And so I think it might be just beneficial to just take a couple minutes and just quickly recap those. And I'll stop at the end of the board governance policy and then kind of go over the ones for the advisory committee policy after that. But in the minutes from that October 25th meeting, it summarizes that the board reviewed and recommended changes, and the modifications included that the board governance policy would be replaced by two new documents: an expectations for board members document and a separate advisory committee policy. The expectations document includes language noting conflicting statutes and regulations hold higher authority to provisions in the document. The expectations document changes many of the shall phrasings in the code of conduct section to should, due to the governor's office having authority over the appointment and removal of board members, rather than the board having the authority to enforce qualifications for membership on the board. The expectations document notes that a board member should not commit acts that would lead to investigations or complaints, replacing previous language that a board member would not be under investigation of charges or complaints. And this was largely due to the Bsrb having a duty to investigate any complaints. So a board member may have no control over whether or not they're under investigation, because we investigate complaints against anyone. The expectations document clarifies that meetings of the board take place every other month, and reports by the executive director to the board are provided at every full board meeting, which reflects current practices of the board. The expectations document would not include restrictions on staff of the Bsrb, aside from language relating to the executive director, due to state employees already having restrictions and other statutes which cover activities for all state employees. The expectations document clarifies the yearly performance evaluation of the executive director of the Bsrb would be performed each calendar year. And that summarizes the main changes for the expectations document. There was an item that involved both documents that just succinct the terminology that wasn't included in the summary list here, but it basically made any changes from chairperson, chairman to chair so that it would be uniform between the documents. The advisory committee policy, that would be the item B under old business. It's just summary of the changes or the additional bullets in that list. The advisory committee policy clarifies that all board members serve on advisory committees. The previous language stated that the chair of the advisory committee would be licensed in the profession of the advisory committee, but was silent to the second member of the two professions that have multiple members on the board. The new language also states that the chair of an advisory committee is not only licensed in the profession, but has been appointed by the governor to represent that profession on the board. The next item is the advisory committee policy includes a maximum of 10 non-board members on the advisory committee. Previously, there had been a minimum, but not a maximum. The advisory committee policy does not include the phrase board members may serve on the advisory committee, which was previously included in the board governance policy. There's no restriction on previous board members serving on advisory committees, nor language that previous board members will automatically be added to the advisory committees. The advisory committee policy changes terminology to recommend the assistant director or licensing manager attend the advisory committee meetings rather than the previously titled credentialing specialist, and notes the assistant attorney general representing the board should attend when their attendance is requested. The advisory committee policy clarifies appointments should be staggered to avoid having too many members reach maximum length of service at the same time. The advisory committee policy includes new language on reviewing nominees for membership, noting that the committee should work to ensure there is diverse representation, including but not limited to geographic, setting, gender, culture, and ethnicity. The advisory committee policy includes revised terminology to replace the use of the term nominations in certain sections, so it is clear the advisory committee will reach recommendations for new members, and those recommendations will be provided to the chair of the board for consideration. And the advisory committee policy removes language that the list of recommendations would be provided to the chair at a board meeting and allows for appointees to be contacted by email. So this is definitely not a comprehensive list of everything that is in those two documents, but I wanted to highlight all of the changes from what was previously in those documents. And in going through, there is one other small change that I would request from the board for your consideration. In the advisory committee policy, under the heading structure of the committee, there is language that says the chair of the committee will be a board member licensed in the discipline of that committee and appointed by the governor to represent that discipline on the board. Well, currently one of the advisory committees, the Behavior Analyst Advisory Committee, does not have a behavior analyst on the board. So I would ask for some clarifying language that maybe says something like, if possible, the chair of the committee will be a board member licensed in the discipline of the committee and appointed by the governor to represent that discipline on the board, just to make sure we take care of that instance.
I would like to change that to if possible, because we're finding ourselves in that situation right now. So we want to make that clarification. Any comments?
Would it be if you add if possible, does that open doors for? I mean, what does that mean outside of the ABA folks? So if it's hard to find a psychologist, does that mean it's possible? I mean, could it be if that profession is represented on the board? Is that
correct? Because, well, that's at least my understanding. David, correct me if I'm wrong, but we don't have a behavioral analyst on the board, so we needed to change that.
I understood that.
You're right. We don't want to open it up to others. Right.
If possible, could open it up for other reasons other than lack of a behavior analyst on the board.
Mm-hmm.
So if it could be if the profession is represented on the board, and that way that, I don't know, maybe that's too cumbersome. I don't know.
Well, and I guess to clarify, because that's a good point. Maybe it would be helpful to also add the sentence, advisory committee chairs should be board members, because that would address both things too. So it would point that these are intended to be board members that are chairs of the advisory committees, and then it would take care of that instance under the current situation.
I'm good with that language.
Rick, is that good? Okay.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone opposed to that language or going ahead with the draft for the advisory committee policy and the guidance document for, board members? I'm falling apart here. All right,
Well,
so no one's opposed to that. We're good.
Okay, so what we will do, we'll clean that up with the revised language, and then we will have both of these documents posted under the policies section of the Bsrb website after we've had a chance to go ahead and clean up and make official versions of them.
Thank you. All right, reviewing language for marriage and family therapy in residence change.
So, and Leslie Allen will probably speak to most of this, but there is a document in your packet. It is labeled draft changes to KAR 102-5-3. So that's what Leslie will be talking to.
Okay, so of course, Marriage and Family Therapy's education regulation is written differently than everybody else's. So it was hard to try and determine where in residence should fit. And
Well,
what I
and
did,
sorry, before you get to it, let me kind of frame the conversation because you and I
oh,
talked
I'm
about
sorry,
this.
I thought you did that. I wasn't listening.
That's quite all right.
Um,
Appreciate
The
Um,
MFT committee has requested that the in residence that is found in the education regulations not be applicable to those programs that are COA MFTE accredited, which would fall in line with all of the other professions. And they had it up in the beginning of the regulation. So what I've done is I removed it from subsection B and added it to the end of section D as in dog. I am not sure, and that seemed the easiest or most reasonable way to do it, but I have not had it checked by Mary. And then once I have that checked by Mary, I would go through the rest of the regulation because they have a section for related fields and it's written differently. It's not written into the regulation like the other professions. So I would go ahead and change the rest of the regulation, but I wanted to wait until after I took it to Mary Greb at D of A to see if that's the correct positioning of the when someone has to be in residence at the institution, so that it only applies to those not COA MFTE. Mary, do you have any?
Actually, Leslie, correct me if I'm wrong. I just want to take a stab at phrasing this. So for individuals who may be watching the meeting that aren't as familiar with the statutes and regulations, there's certain requirements for the different programs that indicate how much of their coursework has to be in residence. And by in residence, we mean physically at the institution. And the previous regulatory language indicated that for the marriage and family therapy profession, they had to have completed no less than 50% of the coursework in residence at the one institution. So the change that you're describing is on page 2, and then the new language is on page 5. And you're saying that if there's an institution that is COMFTI accredited, that would not apply to the general requirement that 50% of the coursework would be in residence. But for the ones that were not accredited by the national accrediting body, the requirement for the 50% of coursework in residence would still apply. Is that,
Yes.
that accurate? Okay.
Sorry, I can't talk.
And I think this would have been a recommendation from a marriage and family therapy advisory committee. Sorry, Mary, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that's something our advisory committee wanted to bring forth. And I just wanted to kind of check. Leslie's always so good about telling us, yes, this is different than the other professions, but does this then become consistent or similar to the other professions?
Yes, it does.
Great.
Looks good.
Yeah, thank you for working on that.
All right, I guess we don't need to move forward on that. You're going to do more checking, Leslie, with the other Mary you referenced.
If this is okay, yeah, then I'll go ahead and talk to Mary Greb.
Okay, anyone opposed to this moving forward? Okay, looks like you got the green light. All right, Bruce, I believe you're up with Complaint Review Committee report.
Okay, I always like to compliment this committee as being perhaps one of the hardest working committees on Bsrb. Every 2 months, we get a large number of documents, a large number of cases that need to be gone over and figured out so it makes sense. And some of these are fairly easy, but it seems like more and more there's some that are very, very complex and hard to figure out. So kudos to the entire committee, and kudos to Cindy and Joan, the two investigators, because they're the ones who spend their entire life in this arena. I can't imagine what that might be like. Anyway, so is Cindy still on the call?
Yes, she is.
Yes, Bruce, now that I unmuted it.
Okay, here's your chance to be famous. Talk to the board about what this report means.
I think that the statistics, that you can look at them, and they're kind of self-explanatory, but I wanted to highlight something. If you look at, we usually talk about what happened in the complaint review committee, but today I wanted to look at what's the RAV statistics, and that's the number of complaints or RAVs, which are the reports of the alleged violations. And that we are starting to increase the reports of alleged violations that are coming in. It looks like we're on pace to have about 40 more complaints this year. That's not up to the number of complaints that we had before COVID. I would guess that perhaps that is due to renewals, the start of the renewal process. One of the reasons might be a function of renewals is to protect the public, in that we ask 6 questions. One of them is, since your last renewal, have you been convicted of a felony or a misdemeanor against persons? Or since your last renewal, has a complaint or a lawsuit been filed against you? There are 6 questions that we ask. And sometimes complaints are began because of those, and those can be very serious based on the answers to those questions. There have been expired licenses, but I think part of them are due to the beginning again the renewal process. But I'm guessing we'll have about 40 more complaints this year. Does anyone have any questions about either the one page that says RAV statistics, and this is again for a fiscal year, which is July, starting July 1, or the other page, which is the cases that we look at each complaint review committee?
Cindy, are you saying that you are expecting to have an additional 40 before the end of?
Yes, compared to last year.
Okay.
Just estimating based on the numbers that we received in the first 6 months of the fiscal year.
Okay, so by the end of fiscal year 2023, there will be 40 more than there were at the end of fiscal year 2022.
Yes.
So that would be 93?
No, I'm guessing, I'm doubling. I'm guessing that we'll have about 160. I'm taking 77. I'm rounding it up to 80, and I'm guessing we'll have about 160.
Okay.
We've had 77 so far for the first 6 months. I rounded it up to 80. I'm not David. I'm not exact. So I rounded it up to 80. And so I go, we're going to have 160 complaints this year. Last year, we only had approximately 130 last fiscal year.
And just to clarify, the previous fiscal year that we ended July of last year was 21. So we're currently in fiscal year 2022, and then we'll begin fiscal year 2023, July 1st of 22.
So we again are on a fiscal year starting July. So those statistics were on the first 6 months of fiscal year 2020. So it's just based on an estimate of 6 months. And I do think that part of the fiscal year, people might say, well, is it because of COVID? I actually think that our numbers were part due to renewals. I do think that our numbers of complaints had already picked up from COVID, that the decrease in complaints that happened at the beginning, that happened more in the early part of, I'm trying to stop and think. We did lose complaints, but we'd already seen that pick up, that people did stop making complaints, perhaps because they hadn't seen their counselor, perhaps because they didn't have contact with other counselors, but we've already seen that start to increase.
I still think it would too, Cindy, at some point, to be able to categorize some of the complaints. And, I know we have those that were dismissed and those that are not, but I think it would be very interesting to, at least in our profession, to see where those violations occur, just in terms of education and the need for more continuing education in those areas or whatnot.
I think that, and I think we've talked about this before. So we have two things. We have allegations and we have complaints. I think perhaps when we get the new database, those will be things that we can track. When we get the new database instigated.
I think that'd be extremely helpful, because I was just looking in December under LCSWs, there's a 19.75%. I just wonder what that means more in detail.
No, but also remember, those are open complaints. So there's two things on the back. Maybe this will just help too. We have two, I'll hold it up. We have two things. That the top one is open complaints. And then the bottom box, and that could just mean they're open, that we're waiting for them to get resolved. And the bottom box are cases received. And so those just mean complaints, not violations. And so that doesn't mean we could just, there's some licenses that just, we tend to get a lot of complaints against.
And of those that they have not been determined yet.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it.
They'll be determined or looked at at our next meeting.
Yeah. Or perhaps much later than that. They could be held open for an unknown reason.
Okay.
There are several reasons that they could get held open for a long time. Example could be, I'm just trying to use a generic examples because they could be appealed. There could be a court matter.
Yeah, and just to kind of let you know too, so to avoid double counting, when we list these complaints, they are assigned to what we can identify as the person's primary license. And we know that some individuals hold more than one license. And so there was a request to split these out to identify it by each individual license they have. So you could look at it and say, well, how many complaints have we received against individuals who hold this license or individuals who hold that license? And that is something that Cindy and I have worked on. And I believe we'll be able to provide something to the board at the next board meeting so that we have one that avoids double counting. And then we have a separate list which reflects anything for any license that someone has. So you can check it by the license type as well.
Cindy, I want to follow up on your hypothesis that it's related to renewals. If that's the case, wouldn't you see the same increase every 2 years?
Okay, only for yours, Rick. Only for a license. So, you LPs are the only
right.
license that renews every year. Everybody else, there's kind of a fluctuation. Okay. Although some licenses there tend to be clusters, like in June or a certain time when there's a graduation. But only one license is biennial. Biennial.
Right. Forget about that sometimes.
No, that's a really good point. But there is a cluster in, let's say, the 2 months later for your license type. Assuming though that there would be not just complaints, that there would be violations.
And just to clarify, Cindy, the licensure for licensed psychologist comes up every June of even numbered years. So it is still a 2 year.
So there, not every, so even numbered years. Yeah. So just not even every 2 years. It's just, and you'd also have to assume that there would actually, that people wouldn't follow through on it. I mean, there's actually have to be that everyone, there could just be that everybody does well at it. It's stuck in my head that there's only 800 psychologists, but I know there's more than that now. but you're dealing with a small fraction of our number of licensees in our whole state of Kansas too.
All right, any other questions or comments? Thank you, Cindy and Bruce, for that. Ready to move on with professions reports. Licensed psychology is up first.
I think we have nothing to report right now.
Thank you. Social work.
I don't see Andres, so I'll report. We met October the 19th and also November the 3rd. And the biggest job that we had, that we were faced with, was we're looking at the 30 applicants that, we received. And so the 30th, the October 19th, we did that. And we discussed other things during that meeting, as well as the C, diversity, equity, inclusion. But then on the November 3rd, we kind of ruled down from 30 to 15, I think, and, tried to make our recommendations for our 4 new social work advisory committees. So we're full 10 members, and so we're very happy about that. We were to meet in December, but we canceled that meeting. It was December 21st, and we scheduled it. And this is where I might need to get David's okay on this. I think we just rescheduled it for February the 15th, Tuesday at 1 o'clock, but I'm not 100% sure. I know we rescheduled it.
I am checking right now.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't write that down on my calendar, because I didn't have my new calendar. at the
February,
time.
yeah, the next meeting is February 15th. Yep.
Okay. Gotcha.
Thank you, Carolyn. Professional counseling.
And Laura Shaughnessy is not in attendance today, but that committee did meet. I don't believe that there are any recommendations to report back to the board.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Master's level psychology.
Yeah, we met November 4th. As I mentioned, we have 3 new advisory committee members. Talked about the discussion of CEUs for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Also, had an initial discussion of the in-residence requirement, and syncing expiration dates for multiple licenses. Our committee recommended providing that as an option. We discussed the pre-approval continuing ed courses that we talked about earlier, and our next meeting is February 10th.
Thank you, David. Marriage and family therapy, Mary?
We don't have any updates since the last meeting. We canceled a meeting, so we are also on schedule for February.
Thank you. Addiction counseling.
Yeah, we met on December 17th, and we welcomed our new advisory committee members. Really, we didn't have much of an agenda, except David Fye did kind of go over the whole COMA and new member information and gave some updates from the office and from the board to the committee. So we meet again on March 18th.
Thank you. Behavior analysis, sorry. Bruce?
Okay. We skipped our last meeting. Was a meeting before that was the first meeting that had in like 2 years. And so very, very delinquent. The biggest issue that came up in the discussion was the fact that we need to get back on a meeting schedule, and that we need to get board members filled out, get more and more advisory committee members. And so hopefully that's been taken care of now. The next issue is getting a chair for the advisory board. I'm not a behavior analyst. They need a behavior analyst to be the chair. And now that they have a full complement of advisory board members, hopefully when we meet next time, which is February 9th, we can get a name to submit. And David, what do we just go through the governor's appointment committee. Is that how we do that?
So I believe you were indicating the advisory committee made a recommendation that members should be added to the board who's a behavior analyst. And so just as a reference for board members, the board members that are identified to be named by the governor are in statute. And so the statute does call for 12 individuals to be on the board, and it specifically indicates which professions would be on the board, and that there would be 4 public members. So there is currently not a behavior analyst who is outlined in statute to be part of the members of the board for the BSRB. So any change to add a member to the board would require a change to statute, which would have to be part of a bill that would go before the legislature and would have to be enacted. Now, in terms of who could chair that advisory committee, the language that the board looked at earlier today did indicate that a board member would chair each of the advisory committees, and that if a member of the board was on the board representing that profession, then they would chair that advisory committee, but it would still be a board member who would chair each of the advisory committees.
So the work of this advisory committee then is to go through that process and get one of their members of the advisory board to be appointed to the BSRB board. And I don't think we've gone through that process for several years, adding a new profession. So that should be fun. And then once we get that, then we can have a chair of the advisory committee appointed, which will probably be the new board member.
David Fye, is that something that the board makes the decision to move forward with that, or?
So the way the advisory committee document, the advisory committee policy is worded, is that any recommendations from the advisory committee will be brought to the board, and the board could either act on those or not act on those, but they're available for discussion. So if it's a recommendation to the board, I mean, ultimately what would go into statute would be something that the board would, the items that would go into a bill for the legislature would be items that the board agrees should go forward as an item from the BSRB. So the only way that a member could be on the board as a behavior analyst would be if one of the existing board members became licensed as a behavior analyst, or if the statutes were changed to say that a behavior analyst would be a board member. And so if that happened, they would increase the board size from 12 members to 13 members. So it really is a recommendation for the board to consider or discuss, but without a board motion, or I guess a board agreement, the process wouldn't move forward unless the board had voted to do that.
Yeah, this is Mary. Just hearing your explanation earlier, David, it makes sense to me with the small amount of behavior analysts that there are, that the structure of what we have in place could sufficiently, not that Bruce wants that role, but that a board member could be the liaison to that advisory committee and still have representation to the board of what their activities are without having to change law, which seems like the path of least resistance. Mm-hmm. At least in my opinion, I haven't been on the board all that long, but I know that there has been difficulty with this finding enough behavior analysts to participate. So just at the first sweep, I know we'd have to have more discussion, but I sort of look at it like the way we have it structured does make sense and would work adequately for the population that we're looking to have their input.
I think getting a sufficient number of advisory committee members is very important, so that they can, have representation, like you say, from the whole profession. The one thing that impressed me was, as we discussed this at the last meeting, was it's a very small group of people, and they all know each other very, very well. I know that's not the same in some of our other professions. We don't know each other near as well as this small group of behavior analysts. So I think that's kind of neat.
This is just a question. Document number 6, David, that you provided earlier, the LBAs and the LABAs. So there's about 300 of these folks, right? 300 currently, about 300, a little over 300, either licensed assistant behavior analysts or licensed behavior analysts.
Yes, I think as of beginning of this year, it was 305.
Yeah. So about the same number as the LMLPs.
So if you
well,
put
right.
them together, LMLPs and LCPs, it's about half the number.
Yeah, about half.
That number is about 590, and then the BAs are about 305.
Okay.
Do you know how many of the behavior? I'm sorry. Do you know how many behavior? Do you know how many of behavior analysts also hold another license? Just a question.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I don't have data on that, but I can. So 2 floors up from where I am right now, there's just a whole slew of these folks, right? And frequently, their students that are ABA students will attempt to get licensed. Had attempted to get licensed as either LPs or something else, but they weren't always real successful at that, right? So that was the push for the licensure. But I suspect that there is a number of practicing folks that probably are behavior analysts that have a different license.
Yeah, there's a number of professions that are exempted in the regulations. Notably on our board, psychologists.
Okay. So that ends the reports. Do we want to add that information to the next board meeting to review or discuss further? We can do that.
Bring back some information as far as the number of behavior analysts who have multiple licenses or other licenses under the Bsrb.
Is that what you're requesting, Rick? Is that what you were asking? I'm sorry, I can't remember who was.
No, that wasn't my question.
Yeah.
I just
Mary, I'm sorry, it was Mary's
Yeah, I was
question.
asking just to see if there's other representation, like, you know, how far do we need to take this is to make sure there's representation.
Okay.
Yeah, I can pull those numbers and I'll try to bring back a report for the board at the next board meeting.
Thank you. All right, if that's all, then I would, I guess we need a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second?
I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed, same sign. All right. Thanks, everyone. A lot of hard work. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Leslie.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.